Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
I am really glad you are tuning in today because we are doing something, well, a little different than usual.
We are definitely shifting gears today.
Yeah, we usually spend a ton of our time looking at the high-gloss finish of the real estate world. You know, the drill with the bidding wars and the sold signs.
Massive mortgages.
Exactly, massive mortgages and the thrill of the chase in the buying and selling market. It is exciting and sexy and high octane.
But today we are slowing down.
We are pivoting to look at this massive, quiet giant standing right in the middle of the room. We are heading into the world of residential leasing in Ontario.
And it is about time we did. You are right that the sales market gets all the headlines. It is sort of the flashy sibling.
Yeah,
But leasing, that is where a huge portion of the population actually lives their lives day to day.
I was looking at the numbers from the source material we are working with today,
Hmm.
the educational modules for the Real Estate Council of Ontario, and one stat just hit me right between the eyes.
The 30% figure?
Yes. Approximately 30% of all residential properties in Ontario are leased. That is practically 1 in 3 homes.
It is a staggering number when you really visualize it.
It really is.
Just walk down any street in Toronto or Ottawa or even smaller towns now and count the doors. 1-2 rental. 1-2 rental. That represents millions of people.
Right.
And for the real estate professionals listening, or even just for you as an informed citizen, ignoring this sector is a huge blind spot.
Exactly. And the stakes feel different here, too. When we talk about buying, we talk about investment and ROI.
The financial side.
Yeah, the numbers. But when we talk about leasing, especially for the tenant, we are talking about shelter. We are talking about where they sleep at night.
That is the crucial distinction right there. For a real estate salesperson representing a landlord isn't just a transactional job of finding a warm body with a checkbook.
No, it's much more than that.
You are helping someone manage a major, often multi-million-dollar asset. And if you are representing the tenant, you are often helping someone find a home at a critical and sometimes really vulnerable juncture in their life.
Like they just got divorced or moved to the country.
Exactly. Or they are students moving away for the first time. The human element is incredibly high.
And here's the catch that we're going to spend the rest of this deep dive unpacking. While the human element is high, the legal element is incredibly rigid.
Oh, absolutely.
We're dealing with the Residential Tenancies Act, the RTA. And from what I read in the prep materials, this isn't just a set of loose guidelines. It is a minefield.
It is absolutely a minefield. And it is a minefield where the map changes depending on who you ask.
What do you mean by that?
Well, people think the map is one thing based on what they hear from friends, but the law says another.
Right, the urban legends of renting.
Exactly. The RTA is designed to balance property rights, the landlord owning the bricks with the human right to housing. And that balance creates some very specific and frankly sometimes counterintuitive rules.
So here is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to decode the legalese. We are going to look at the rights and the responsibilities and the absolute do not cross lines for both landlords and tenants.
And we are going to bust a lot of myths today.
Oh, we definitely are. And I have to tease this because when I read it in the notes, I actually laughed out loud.
The rent withholding.
Yes. We are going to talk about the specific conditions under which a tenant can legally withhold rent and get this, potentially keep it forever.
It sounds like an urban legend, doesn't it? The free rent cheat code.
It really does.
But it is a real mechanism in the Act specifically tied to paperwork.
Mhm.
We will get there.
We will also get into the difference between being engaged to a property versus being married to it.
A great analogy.
And we are going to discuss tenancy at sufferance, which sounds like a Shakespearean tragedy, but is actually a very common legal headache.
It is. It is all about what happens when the welcome mat is pulled away, but the guest is still standing on it.
Okay, let us unpack this properly. We have to start with the basics.
The vocabulary.
Yeah, and I know vocabulary sounds like we are back in grade school, but in this specific world, words actually matter.
They matter a lot.
If you use the wrong word, you might be describing a completely different legal reality.
The source material actually calls understanding these terms the first benchmark of competence.
Right.
If you are a professional or even just a savvy landlord using the precise terms, isn't just about sounding smart, it builds trust.
It shows you actually know what you are doing.
Exactly. It shows you know the game. If you walk into a situation calling things by the wrong names, you look like an amateur.
And in a regulated environment, amateurs get sued.
Amateurs get sued or they lose a lot of money.
So let us hit the players first. We have the landlord and the tenant. simple enough. But the contracts, especially the older ones or the lawyer-drafted ones, often use lessor and lessee.
Right. And I know it feels like we are stepping into a Dickens novel with those terms, the lessor.
It sounds very formal.
But there is a real reason for it. Lessor refers to the landlord, the person or organization owning the unit, and lessee is the tenant.
Why not just stick to landlord and tenant, though? Is this just lawyers trying to justify their hourly rate?
Maybe a little bit, but it signals something really important about the nature of the relationship. It comes from the root word lease.
Okay.
When you use lessor and lessee, you are signaling that this is a transfer of an estate in land. It is not just a service agreement.
So it is more than just paying for a service.
Exactly. You aren't just a customer buying a monthly subscription to a roof over your head. You are a lessee, which means you hold a specific interest in that property.
That leads us perfectly to the term rental unit.
Right.
So rental unit is the catch-all term for the living accommodation.
It covers the apartment, the basement suite, the whole house, whatever is being rented for residential premises.
But the magic happens when the lessee actually enters the rental unit, right? They acquire what is called a leasehold interest.
Yes. Leasehold interest.
That sounds heavy. That sounds like they actually own something.
In a very real way they do. And this is the concept that trips up so many new landlords.
Because they think, well, it's my house, I own it.
Exactly. They own the freehold interest, the bricks, the dirt, the mortgage. But the moment they sign that lease, they have carved out a slice of their ownership rights.
The right to be there.
The right to possess the property and the right to use it. And they have effectively sold that slice to the tenant for a specific period of time.
So the tenant literally owns the right to be there.
Exactly. It is a protected interest in the land. It is not just a casual favor from the landlord. It is a property right.
That is a crucial mental shift to make.
It explains why a landlord can't just waltz in and sit on the couch because they own the place.
Right, because for the duration of that lease, the right of possession belongs to the tenant, not the landlord.
Precisely. That is why the laws are so aggressive about privacy, which we will touch on later.
But before anyone even moves in, before that leasehold interest is legally created, there is this courtship phase.
The engagement.
Yes. The sources distinguish between an agreement to lease and the lease itself.
That is the best analogy for it. So imagine the agreement to lease as the proposal and the acceptance.
Okay.
It is technically defined as an agreement for lease without a finalized form of lease.
Okay, but engagements get broken all the time in real life.
True.
If I sign an agreement to lease, can I just walk away if I find a better apartment next week? Can I just say, sorry, I want my ring back?
That is a really dangerous assumption. No, you can't.
I can't.
An engagement ring you can give back, but an agreement to lease is a contract to sign a contract.
Okay, so it binds you.
It acts as the consensus builder. It sets out the price, the start date, the terms, and all the conditions.
Right.
It effectively says, I promise to sign the formal lease on this specific date. If you walk away after signing an agreement to lease, you are in breach of contract.
Wow. So you can be sued for damages just for walking away from the agreement part?
Absolutely. You can be sued. It is a binding promise.
So it is binding, but it isn't the final document.
That is the nuance. It isn't the final document that governs the actual day-to-day residency. It is just the bridge to get you there.
And the lease or tenancy agreement is the actual destination.
Correct. The lease is the document that finally transfers those rights of possession. It is the operational manual for the relationship.
Now, the sources mention something that always surprises people. A tenancy agreement can be written oral or implied.
Yes.
Wait, hold on. If I just tell my buddy, yeah, crash here for $500 a month and we never write a single thing down,
Yeah.
surely that's not a binding real estate contract. That is just a casual arrangement between friends.
In the eyes of the Residential Tenancies Act, that handshake is as binding as a 50-page document sealed with wax.
You're kidding.
Not at all. You have created a
Seems incredibly messy.
It is incredibly messy. That is why the sources emphasize that while oral leases are legal, they are a terrible idea.
Because there is no proof.
Exactly. If it is verbal, you have no proof of the terms. Who pays for the water heater rental?
Right. Who shovels the snow?
Who is responsible for the driveway?
Right.
Is the parking spot included or is it extra? If it is not written down, you are setting yourself up for a massive he said, she said dispute at the landlord and tenant board.
And he said, she said is expensive and stressful.
Time is money and legal battles are pure stress. Just write it down. Always.
Speaking of writing it down, this brings us to what I think is the biggest game changer in recent Ontario rental history.
Oh, the standard lease.
Yes. We talked about the Wild West days of leasing, but then came the government. Let us talk about the holy grail of forms, the standard form of lease.
This was a massive shift, seismic really. Before April 30th, 2018, the rental market in Ontario was, let us call it, creative.
Creative how? Like, what were people doing?
You had landlords writing leases on the backs of napkins. You had people downloading random templates from the internet that were written for laws in Texas or England.
Oh, wow. So completely irrelevant legal frameworks.
Completely. You had clauses that were totally wild. Things like, the tenant must be home by 10 p.m., or no guests allowed on Tuesdays.
We were joking.
I wish I was. Or clauses like, the tenant must pay for all repairs under $500.
Which I assume are completely illegal.
Completely illegal in Ontario. But if you are a tenant, especially a young one or someone new to the country, and you sign that piece of paper...
Do you think it is legally binding because your signature is on it?
Exactly. You feel bound by it. You don't know that the clause is legally void. It created this huge fog of confusion and exploitation.
So the government finally stepped in.
They dropped the hammer. They introduced the residential tenancy agreement, which we call the standard form of lease.
And they made it mandatory.
Yes, for most private residential tenancies.
So I can't just type up my own pretty contract anymore in Word.
No, you can't. You can add an appendix for specific things like condo rules or specific smoking bylaws, but the core contract, the bones of the deal,
It has to be that specific government form.
it has to be the standard form. It levels the playing field entirely. Everyone is looking at the exact same clauses in the exact same order written in plain English.
Okay, but let us play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
I am a stubborn landlord. I have been doing this for 20 years. I have my own custom contract that I really like. I decide to ignore the government, and I have my tenant sign my old contract.
Okay.
What actually happens? Is the lease void? Does the tenant have to move out?
No, the tenancy itself is still valid. The tenant still has the absolute right to live there.
Okay.
But by refusing to use the standard lease, you have just handed your tenant a loaded weapon.
Ooh. Okay, this is the part I teased in the intro. Walk me through this. I am the tenant. I signed the old school lease because I needed the place. But now I am listening to this deep dive and I know my rights.
Right.
What can I do?
You have the right to demand the standard lease. You send a written request. An email is perfectly fine saying, hey, please send me the signed standard form of lease.
And the landlord has to comply.
They have exactly 21 days. The clock starts the second you hit send on that email.
Tick-tock.
Tick-tock. Now let us say the landlord ignores you. Maybe they are lazy. Maybe they are arrogant. Maybe they just don't check their email.
Okay.
The 21 days expire.
And here comes the nuclear option.
If that 21 days passes and you still do not have the standard leases, you as the tenant are allowed to withhold 1 month's rent.
Just flat out not pay it?
You withhold it. No, you don't spend it on a new TV. That is a crucial distinction. You hold it in your account.
Okay, so you are basically keeping it in escrow yourself.
You essentially say, I am holding this ransom until I get my proper government paperwork.
That is incredibly aggressive.
It is, and it gets the landlord's attention very, very quickly. Usually the landlord wakes up, realizes their huge mistake, and scrambles to send the form.
Okay, and then what happens? Do I get to keep the money?
Not yet. If the landlord provides the standard lease within 30 days of the rent being withheld, you have to pay that money back.
Okay, so it wasn't a gift, it was just leverage.
Exactly. You hand the cash over. No harm, no foul, just a very stressful lesson learned for the landlord.
But what if they still don't do it? What if they are just completely out to lunch and ignore that too?
This is the massive loophole. If the landlord is so stubborn or disorganized that they let the initial 21-day request period pass,
Yeah.
and then they let the 30-day withholding period pass.
So we are nearly 2 months into this dispute.
Correct. If that window completely closes and you still don't have the standard lease,
Yeah.
you keep the money.
Permanently. Like I never have to pay that month of rent ever again.
Permanently. The landlord cannot collect it retroactively. It becomes effectively free rent.
That is a harsh penalty just for not filling out a PDF.
It really is. But it shows you exactly how serious the province is about standardization. They effectively monetize the bureaucracy.
Wow.
If you don't follow the rules, it costs you exactly 1 month's revenue.
I bet there are listeners right now scrambling to check what lease form they signed.
I guarantee it. And if you are a landlord listening to this, check your files. If you are using that old template from 2010, you need to fix it today.
That is wild. It really underscores that ignorance of the law is incredibly expensive in real estate.
Very expensive.
Moving on from the contract itself, I want to talk about the type of living arrangement. I think most people assume a lease is just a lease. You sign for a year, you stay for a year, you leave.
Right. A simple transaction.
But the sources break this down into 4 distinct types of tenancy, and they all function very differently.
They do. And understanding these distinctions is critical because they determine how and when a tenancy can actually end.
And frankly, this is where a lot of the myths about renting live.
Oh, absolutely.
So type number 1, the fixed term tenancy. This is the classic, right? I am renting this condo for 12 months.
Correct. It has a specific start date and a very specific end date. It gives the tenant exclusive possession for that exact term.
It is stable.
It is. Both sides know exactly what they are getting.
Yeah.
But here's the biggest myth in Ontario renting. People think that when the end date arrives, the tenant has to leave.
I hear that all the time. Tenants saying, my lease is up next month, so I have to start packing. Or landlords saying, your lease is up, so I am kicking you out.
And that is completely, absolutely false in Ontario.
Really?
The expiry of the fixed term is not a reason for eviction. Let me repeat that. Expiry of the term is not an eviction reason.
So when that date hits, what happens?
When that date expires, if the tenant doesn't want to move out and the landlord hasn't given a valid eviction notice for a specific legal reason, like moving in themselves, the tenant does not have to go anywhere.
So what happens to the lease document? Does it just vanish into thin air?
No, it transforms. It acts like a legal caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It automatically converts into type number 2.
Which is?
A periodic tenancy.
A periodic tenancy. Sounds repetitive.
It is. A periodic tenancy has a fixed period, usually monthly, but an indefinite length.
Okay, so it just keeps going.
It automatically renews period after period, month after month. This is the month-to-month status that most long-term renters are actually living in.
So it is the default state of a tenancy in Ontario after that initial year is up.
Exactly.
So you don't actually need to sign a new lease every year.
No, you don't. In fact, many tenant advocates strongly suggest you shouldn't sign a new one.
Why is that?
Because you have the right to just let it roll over into a periodic tenancy. You keep all the exact same terms and conditions from the original lease, but now you have more flexibility.
Because you can leave easier.
Right. You can leave with just 60 days notice instead of being locked in for another full year.
That is really good for security and flexibility. Now, what about the weirder ones? The sources mention a tenancy at will. This sounds vague, like we are just vibing.
Vibing is actually not a bad way to describe it, legally speaking.
Really?
Yeah. A tenancy at will creates a massive gray area. It arises when there is no written lease, but the tenant has possession with the landlord's active consent.
Give me a real-world example of that. When does this actually happen in practice?
Well, there are 2 types mentioned, implied and express. An implied tenancy at will might happen if a tenant is occupying a place without paying rent. Maybe a family member crashing on your couch indefinitely.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the express one is really common in real estate transactions, specifically with delayed closings.
Oh, I have heard horror stories about delayed closings.
Picture this scenario. You are selling your house. The closing date is Friday.
Okay.
The moving trucks are packed. The buyer is sitting in their car outside with their kids and dogs waiting for the keys. But then the bank makes a mistake.
Oh, no.
The funds won't arrive until Tuesday because of a long weekend.
That is a total nightmare scenario.
It's a complete nightmare. So the lawyers get on the phone. They want to save the deal. They might agree to let the buyer move their stuff in early on Friday in anticipation of a future closing.
So the buyer moves in, but they haven't actually bought the house yet. And they obviously don't have a lease.
Exactly. They are now a tenant at will. The landlord, who is still technically the seller, consents to them being there.
But because there are no specific lease terms defined, it is a precarious position.
Very precarious.
Why is it so risky?
Because the landlord has so much less control. With a standard lease, you have pages of rules about what you can and cannot do.
Right.
With a tenancy at will, you essentially just have an agreement that says you can stay here.
Wow.
If the deal falls through completely, say the funding actually never comes through, getting that person out can be incredibly messy because you didn't sign a standard lease with clear eviction terms.
So as a seller, by being nice and letting them move their kids in early,
Yeah.
you might be trapping yourself.
You might be. The source material explicitly warns that landlords have iron control here.
Because there is no formal framework.
Right. It can be terminated by either party with reasonable notice, but what exactly is reasonable?
Good question.
A judge might decide that reasonable notice is a full month while you wanted them out in an hour because they didn't buy the house.
That is a massive risk, just to be accommodating. And finally, there is the fourth type, the one with the highly dramatic name, tenancy at sufferance.
Yes. Also known in the industry as the overholding tenant.
Sufferance. It sounds painfully medieval.
It really does, doesn't it? This is when a tenant keeps possession without the landlord's consent after the tenancy has legally ended.
So this is someone just straight up refusing to leave.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe their fixed term expired and they didn't convert to periodic for some specific legal reason.
Or more likely.
More likely, they received a valid termination notice, an actual eviction order from the board, and they just ignored it. They are still physically sitting in the unit.
So why call it sufferance?
Because the landlord is essentially suffering their presence. They aren't consenting to it. They aren't taking rent to create a new tenancy.
Right.
They're just tolerating the physical situation until they can get the legal gears turning to have them physically removed.
Suffering the tenant. I feel like some landlords feel that way even with perfectly good tenants.
Perhaps. But legally, it means there is zero consent. The relationship has completely broken down, but possession hasn't changed hands yet. It is a legal limbo state.
So tenancy at sufferance is basically the landlord's absolute nightmare, someone staying without permission and without paying.
Exactly.
But usually the reason a landlord tolerates a tenant or suffers the business at all comes down to one single thing.
Whether the check clears.
Exactly. Money. Which brings us to the engine of this whole real estate machine. Rent. Simple concept, right? You pay to stay.
You would think so.
But in Ontario, rent is a very loaded term.
It is heavily loaded. We have the concept of lawful rent.
Lawful rents.
This means the rent amount must comply strictly with the RTA. You can't just charge whatever you feel like if the unit is subject to rent control rules.
And rent increases are strictly regulated too. I feel like every single year the news makes a big deal announcing the guideline.
Yes, the rent increase guideline. It is set annually by the Ontario government based on inflation. For most tenants in Ontario, this is the hard cap.
So landlords can't just hike at 10% because their taxes went up.
No, and they can only increase the rent once every 12 months.
And they can't just text you the night before, right? Like, hey, rent is up $50 starting tomorrow.
Absolutely not. They must give 90 days written notice.
90 days.
Yes, and going back to our theme of strict paperwork, they must use the proper government form. It is called Form N1.
So if I get a text saying rent is going up or even a really polite formal email, I can essentially just ignore it.
Technically, yes, you can. Until you receive that specific N1 form, the legal clock has not started on that 90 days. The notice is entirely invalid.
Now, are there exceptions to this cap? Because I feel like I have heard horror stories about people getting their rent doubled overnight.
There are major exceptions. The sources note that newer buildings, specifically those occupied for the very first time after November 15, 2018, are exempt from the guideline.
Ah, so they have no cap.
Correct. Nonprofits and student residences also often have different rules or exemptions from the cap, but for the vast majority of private rentals in older stock, that guideline is the absolute Bible.
Let us talk about deposits next, because this is another huge area of confusion.
Deposits are a mess of misinformation.
I moved here from a different province years ago, and I was completely used to damage deposits. You know, you pay half a month's rent up front, and if you put a hole in the wall or ruin the carpet, the landlord keeps it to fix the damage.
And that practice is completely illegal in Ontario.
It is surprisingly common knowledge that people think it is okay, though. I see rental ads asking for damage deposits all the time.
They ask for them, but the sources are crystal clear on this.
Crystal clear.
Crystal clear. A landlord generally cannot ask for more than 1 month's rent as a deposit, or 1 week's rent if it is a weekly tenancy.
Okay.
And this is the most crucial part. It can only be used for the last month's rent.
So it is strictly applied to the rent payment itself. Not for cleaning fees, not for key replacement, not for repainting the walls.
No, it cannot, under any circumstances, be used for damages.
Wow.
If a tenant completely trashes the place, the landlord has to pursue them through the landlord and tenant board or small claims court to get a legal judgment. They cannot just dip into the deposit jar to cover the drywall repairs.
That seems like a huge vulnerability for landlords. They have to front the repair cost and then fight in court.
It is a risk, absolutely. But the logic behind the rule is that a damage deposit often gets unfairly withheld by unscrupulous landlords for normal wear and tear. So the RTA just removed that option entirely to protect tenants.
And there's another little detail about deposits that I think 99% of landlords forget, and 99% of tenants don't even know exists.
The interest.
Yes, the interest. Talk to me about that.
Well, the landlord is holding your money, right?
Yeah.
If you gave them $2,000 for a last month's rent deposit and you lived there for 5 years, that $2,000 is just sitting in their bank account.
Right. It is not doing me any good.
Exactly. So the RTA requires the landlord to pay the tenant interest on that deposit every single year. The rate is determined by the board and usually matches the rent increase guideline.
I have literally never received an interest check from a landlord in my life. Ever. Am I owed money?
You probably are. Now,
What?
practically speaking, what usually happens in a long-term tenancy is that the interest gets applied to the rent increase top-up.
Unpack that for me. What is the top-up wash?
Okay, let us do the math. Say your rent is $2,000. You gave a $2,000 deposit when you moved in.
Right.
Next year, the rent goes up by 2%. So now your monthly rent is $2,040.
Okay.
Your original deposit is now $40 short of actually covering your new last month's rent.
I see. So I owe them $40 to top up the deposit.
Exactly. But the landlord also owes you roughly 2% interest on the $2,000 they held all year, which is $40.
Ah.
So the interest usually just cancels out the top-up requirement. It is a wash.
That makes sense.
But technically, if there is no rent increase that year, or if the interest rate was set higher than the legal rent increase, they should absolutely be cutting you a check for the difference.
That is a great realization moment for our listeners. Check your lease statements, folks.
Definitely check them.
Now let us move to the rules of engagement. The specific rights and prohibitions outlined in the sources. The material has a list of thou shalt nots for landlords that is pretty intense.
These are the prohibited landlord actions. And these aren't minor infractions. These are serious, strict liability breaches of the Act.
Number 1 on the list, vital services.
Right. A landlord cannot shut off or deliberately interfere with heat, electricity, fuel, gas, or hot and cold water.
Even if I haven't paid my rent in months.
Even if you haven't paid your rent in 6 months, the landlord is not the utility company.
Okay.
They cannot use freezing you out in the winter as an eviction tactic. It is a fundamental health and safety issue.
What if they actually need to fix the boiler, though? They have to turn it off.
That is the practical exception. Temporary shutoff for necessary repairs is allowed, but they need to give proper notice. Or, obviously, if it is a true emergency like a burst pipe, they can shut the water off immediately to stop the flood.
Right. That is just common sense.
But deliberately interfering to punish a tenant, that will get you in massive trouble with the board and result in huge fines.
Next prohibition on the list, seizing property.
This goes way back to the feudal days. Landlords cannot just walk into your apartment and take your TV because you owe them rent money.
That is called distress, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Distress. They cannot seize a tenant's personal property.
Again, even if the tenant is still living there and actively owes thousands in rent.
Correct. The debt is a completely separate legal issue. The landlord cannot hold your furniture or your electronics hostage to force payment.
And the really big one, lockouts.
This is huge. A landlord cannot change the locks and kick a tenant out, period.
But wait, what if they have an eviction order? What if they went to the board? They waited months for a hearing, they won their case, and they have the official piece of paper that says the tenant must get out.
Even then,
Really?
this is a huge misconception. Even if a landlord goes to the board, wins the case, and gets a formal eviction order, they cannot personally enforce it.
They can't just bring a locksmith.
They absolutely cannot go change the locks themselves. It is illegal.
So who actually does it?
Sheriff.
The sheriff. I'm sorry, are we in the Wild West? Do they literally wear a silver badge and a cowboy hat?
No cowboy hat usually, but yes, to the badge. It is the court enforcement office, usually just referred to as the sheriff.
Okay.
They are the only ones with the legal authority to physically remove a tenant from the premises and formally change the locks.
Why is that distinction so heavily enforced?
Think about the alternative scenario. If a landlord could just change the locks while you were at work.
I would come home, my key wouldn't work, my cat would be locked inside. Yeah, I can see how that escalates to physical violence pretty fast.
Exactly. The entire system is designed to prevent physical confrontations in the hallway. It puts a neutral, trained, third party, the sheriff, in charge of the actual displacement.
So vigilante evictions are entirely illegal.
Vigilante evictions are illegal and will get the landlord severely penalized.
That is a massive distinction. You can't just be a cowboy landlord taking justice into your own hands. You have to wait for the actual sheriff.
Precisely. You have to let the process play out to the very end.
One more prohibition that I found really interesting in the sources: payment methods. I have seen so many rental ads saying post-dated checks strictly required.
And that is technically not allowed under the Act. A landlord can suggest post-dated checks or automatic bank debit.
Because it is convenient.
It is very convenient for everyone. But if the tenant says, no, I prefer to e-transfer you every month on the 1st, the landlord cannot refuse to rent to them based solely on that refusal.
Wow.
And they cannot demand it as a hard condition of the lease agreement.
So if I sit down to sign a lease and the landlord slides across the table and says, hand over 12 post-dated checks, I can just say no?
You can. You can say, I will pay you on the 1st of every month via online banking.
And what if we agree on a method, but I want to change it later?
Once a payment method is set, say you both agree to e-transfer, it cannot be changed unless both parties agree to the change.
Okay.
The landlord can't suddenly demand cash halfway through the year, and you can't suddenly start paying in rolls of pennies. It requires mutual consent to alter the established routine.
Okay, let us flip the script now. Those are the prohibitions for the landlords. What are the tenants' actual rights? We talked about the lease, but there's this overarching philosophical concept in the material called security of tenancy.
Security of tenancy. This is really the heart of the entire Ontario leasing system.
How so?
It means essentially that the tenant has the right to stay put. Their housing is secure.
Stay put until when? Exactly.
They decide they want to leave, or until they mutually agree with the landlord to leave.
And if they don't agree?
Then, until, and this is the hard part for landlords, until the board issues an order for a valid legal reason. The key takeaway here is the fundamental power balance.
Right.
The sources specifically note that tenants generally have way more rights regarding termination than landlords do.
Break that down for me. How is the power imbalanced?
Well, a tenant mostly just has to worry about timing. If they want to leave a periodic tenancy, they give 60 days notice and they go.
They don't need to give a valid reason.
They don't need a reason at all. They can just say, I am moving to Bali, or I found a cheaper place down the street. It is entirely their choice.
And the landlord?
The landlord needs a legally valid reason under the Act to end the tenancy.
Like what?
Well, saying, I don't like your attitude, or I want to rent it to my cousin, or I think I can get $500 more from a new tenant, none of those are valid reasons to evict someone.
So they have very limited avenues.
Very limited. They need to prove a specific case, like, I am personally moving into the unit to live there full time, or the tenant hasn't paid rent in 3 months.
And even then, it is not automatic.
Not at all. Even with a valid reason, the tenant has the absolute right to wait for a hearing at the board to dispute the landlord's claim. They do not have to just pack up and leave when they get the notice.
This connects deeply back to the privacy and entry rights we touched on earlier. You mentioned the landlord has to give notice to enter.
Yes. 24 hours written notice is the standard rule.
And they can't just pop in to see how things are going.
Yeah. And the notice has to be, for a specific reason, allowed by the Act, like conducting an inspection or making a repair. They can't just write checking in on the notice. It has to be formal and justified.
It really emphasizes that for the tenant, this space is their home. It is their sanctuary.
Yes.
For the landlord, it is a business asset.
Hmm.
But the law clearly prioritizes the home aspect significantly over the business aspect.
That is a very fair assessment. The concept of the leasehold interest exists to protect the sanctity and security of the home.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
From the definitions of lessor and lessee, our slightly archaic Dickens friends,
Right.
to the 21-day standard lease rule that can literally win you a month of free rent. We covered the 4 types of tenancy, the deposit interest rules, and the strict eviction procedures.
It is a lot to digest.
It is clear that leasing isn't the Wild West anymore.
Far from it. It is a highly regulated, tightly controlled environment. And for good reason, honestly. Housing is an essential human need.
So if we had to distill this entire deep dive down to a key takeaway for our listeners,
Okay.
whether they are accidental landlords renting out a basement or professional investors, or just tenants trying to navigate a tough market, what is the core message?
For me, the absolute anchor of the entire system is the standard lease.
The paperwork.
The paperwork. If you strictly follow that single document, you avoid 90% of the problems. It forces you to comply with the law right from day one.
And the second part?
The second part is deeply understanding security of tenancy. Once a tenant is legally in displacing them is a rigorous, long legal process. You simply cannot cut corners.
That is a serious reality check for anyone getting into the business.
Precisely. You have to know the rules before you play.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a provocative thought that came up for me when we were discussing the tenancy at will.
Oh, the delayed closing scenario.
Yes. We talked about how lawyers sometimes agree to let a buyer move in early to save the real estate deal when a closing is delayed at the bank.
Right.
It is a genuinely nice thing to do. It helps a family out who might otherwise be literally living in a moving truck for a long weekend.
It is a kindness, yes. It is humans helping humans.
But the expert notes clearly say this offers the landlord much less control.
Yes, it does.
So here's the question for you to mull over. How does a landlord or a seller weigh the risk of being nice against the risk of massive legal liability?
It is a tough balance.
At what point does a simple favor become a legal trap? Because if you let someone in without a proper standard lease, you might be creating a tenancy you cannot easily end if things go sideways.
Exactly.
It really makes you wonder if the strict, rigid regulations of the Act actually discourage human kindness and flexibility in the market.
That is a profound question to end on. Because when the rules are this tight, flexibility actually becomes incredibly dangerous.
It does.
And usually it is the nice landlords who get burned the worst because they skip the formal paperwork just to help someone out of a jam.
Definitely something to explore and think about on your own. Thank you for diving deep with us today and unpacking all of this.
It was my pleasure. Lots of great information here.
We will see you on the next deep dive. Keep asking questions.
And keep reading the fine print.
Bye for now.